Hey folks, firmware version 2.0 is rich in features, and this video turned into a hell of a lot of talking, so check out the timeline below. I do go out and shoot with it and demonstrate the new bird detector autofocus as well as a few other top line features. It's tucked in about halfway through the video. Welcome Nikon users. Back in October 2023, Nikon updated the Z9 with firmware version 4.1, which added a whole bunch of new features to it, which effectively leapfrogged the Z8 and left it behind with lots of new things that were only available in the flagship. As of today, they have now updated the Z8 with firmware version 2.0, which claws back most of those software deficiencies and actually adds in a bunch of new things that are only available on the Z8. I have early access to the firmware, so let's go test it out. If you're new to the channel, welcome and thanks for stopping by, folks. I've been doing this for 10 or 12 years now, and I try to put out a mix of new equipment, techniques, travel, and overall fun and welcoming videos for photographers of all levels. I want this to be an inviting place where we can all enjoy this hobby together. Now, getting access to the latest equipment early so that I can present it to you guys really depends on my audience size and seeing growth in that. So I would really appreciate it if you haven't already to subscribe to the channel so that we can continue on this journey together. And if you'd like to, you can check out my website, mattgranger.com, and pick up a free copy of my guide to improving your portraiture. I'll pop a link below for that guide. So look folks, the Z8 and Z9 are an incredible duo, the two flagships for Nikon in 2024, and they're likely to tussle it back and forward as new firmware is brought out for one or the other, not always at the same time, kind of leapfrogging each other into the future. Now, the Z9 is still my personal preference. I own two of them. I do also own a Z8, but the thermal management and the media options on the Z9 just make it a better overall option for me. Having said that, the Z8 was many people's camera of the year for 2023, and firmware version 2.0 really does bring a big range of different updates to this camera. In total, it has over 15 different updates, and I run through all of them in detail and kind of step by step in my Nikon Expert Setup Guide. It runs you through the Z8, Z9, and the entire range, all of the features of these different cameras and major new firmware updates as well. You can check that out below. In this video, I wanted to focus in on a couple of specific things. If you saw my last video that was about Nikon's one big problem, I have a feeling that these two new updates are going to go some way to helping address that, although not, sadly, resolving it entirely, or not directly anyway. Before we get into that, let me run you through the 15 updates that firmware 2.0 brings on a top line level. So in terms of stills, things that it's bringing in that the Z9 already had is pixel shift shooting, it's added a new large size for JPEG recording, and it's added in auto capture. Yay! Ask and ye shall receive. Well, except for pre-capture in RAW, we still don't have that. In terms of video, catching up to the Z9, it's got expanded analog low ISO sensitivity. It adds the slow motion videos. That's where it's actually playing them back like S&Q mode in slow-mo rather than just being a high frame per second clip that will play back normally and you can slow down in post. High-res zoom is now supported on control rings. New options for the high-res zoom speed as well. Things that have been added for stills and video, subject detect for birds. That's a top line one for this camera. It has made a big difference on the Z9. On my recent trip to Bhutan, I have found there is a significant improvement. So hopefully we'll see that is just as good on the Z8 now. It's also added in new picture controls, flat monochrome, deep tone monochrome, and rich tone portrait. They're all coming off the recent ZF camera, and they're not available on the Z9. It's also adding in a feature that, when you're zooming in to check your focus, it was that if you then went to take a photo or reframed, it would stay zoomed in and you would have to then keep hitting the zoom out button to come out again. Now, whilst you're zoomed in, if you half press the shutter button, it will jump back out of zoom. Well, you have the option for that, and I show you that in the setup guide. It also has a couple of new shutter sounds and volume options, not the cat meow that they demonstrated years ago with the Z9, but more shutter options nonetheless. Exposure delay option. It also adds DX image area for auto capture, auto area mode rotation. That's a big one. I'm going to come back to that. and focus point border width options, which I will demonstrate when we go shooting. I've had a look at it. I'm sure for some users that's going to be helpful. Now, the issue I mentioned in my previous video that Nikon has about when you're searching for a subject, you've got plane or bird or animal or person detect on, and your subject is lost in foreground blur, it doesn't move there to get it. The two things that I'm hoping are going to help address that. One is the bird detect. So if it has an algorithm that will look for the shape of a bird, if it's slightly out of focus, slightly focused behind it, I feel like there's more of a chance of it detecting that shape even whilst blurry than if it doesn't have a bird detect. And I do find that the Z9 overall does a bit better with its bird detect mode than the Z8 does without it. So fingers crossed on that one. The second thing is, and shout out to those of you in the comment section on the last video who talked about the ways you work around this foreground blur issue. Instead of pulling manually your focus back in front of your subject, some people said they will go in and switch their AF mode from being tracking or 3D or zone, whatever it may be, to being a single point, and then that will force it to pull back to close focus if it can't find anything or if whatever it's on is close. And then once they detect the bird, for example, they then switch back to their tracking mode or whatever they were shooting to stay with the bird. Still cumbersome, but if it works, it works. Now I'm going to test that out when I go out today. Now what this adds is the ability to set up a loop of different AF area modes as a custom button. So essentially you could say I want single point, 3D and zone out of the dozen or more different options. Then assign it to a button, and when you're in the field you just hit that button and it will go 3D zone single, 3D zone single, 3D zone single as you tap the button. So then rather than having to even go into your I menu and then into a sub menu, you could just be in your tracking, you're in 3D tracking, it can't find the bird, hit the button, go to single point, get the bird, hit 3D tracking, and then go, and you're on your way. So still not the solution that I'm looking for, but it could be the most elegant workaround to date. So to test this out, I have the Z8 with updated firmware version 2.0 and the 400mm 2.8 TC. I'm going to take that along to the bird park, and then I have to compare that against a second Z8 that is running firmware version 1.1 that doesn't have bird detect, and a second 400mm f2.8. We'll shoot these guys side by side and then be able to record through the screen and show you how much better the bird detect does than this one that only has animal as its subject detect option. Let's go. Now I have to say I'm so glad that the aviary is back open in Hong Kong. It's a great place to test out these kind of equipment with birds at natural distances away. There are a lot of people around, but still you're able to shoot in different kinds of dappled light situations that you'll find when you're out shooting in the wild. Now, as I described in my previous video, the issue with this Nikon problem is that when you're focused in front of or very close to your subject, in this case birds, then it locks on beautifully and does a great job. But when you're focused beyond your subject and your subject's blurred out in the foreground, then when you're in the tracking modes, it doesn't pull focus back to find the bird. It's really frustrating. So you need to manually pull the focus back, and then once you're there or in front of it, then it picks it up and you're good to go. So as we go through and shoot today, I want to see if that has improved. Initial impressions shooting the Z8 with firmware version 2.0 using the bird detect mode absolutely is picking out the bird earlier and sticking with the eye much more consistently than it was just using, the animal detect mode on the previous firmware. taking a look at the focus point border width option, I personally don't find the heavier option useful, but I think if you had difficulty with your eyesight, that could be really helpful to see where the point exactly is. Now let's get down to it. Is the new Bird Detect improving how these cameras perform with the foreground blur subject loss issue? Essentially, doing it a dozen or more times, I think yes. When I was using the Z8 with firmware 1.1, I really had to get super close manually focusing back to the bird before it detected it. Whereas on the updated one, whilst it was a lot more blurry and I hadn't pulled focus as far back, it was able to find the bird, detect it, and then once it detected the bird, quickly go to the eye. All in all, I think this is a really great update and Z8 users are going to be thrilled. If you're into photographing birds, make sure you check out my Iceland bird migration tour this May 14th to the 26th. It's a small group tour. I'll be your guide along with a local guide taking you around some of the best places in the country to witness this spectacular annual bird migration. Full details are in the description below. Okay, so overall, the new firmware is doing great, and yes, I do think the using bird subject helps you get it even when it's in the foreground blur. It doesn't solve the issue, but it's closer. You can be slightly past it and it still grab it at a closer range than it did before. And I think that's because the algorithm is looking for the shape of a bird, so it can detect it even once it's a little bit blurrier than it was on firmware version 1.1. Now let's try that other section about using your custom button to toggle through the AF modes. I didn't get good footage of this at the bird park, so I've set up a little makeshift scenario here. Okay, so I'm going to set up my Atomos here, pop it into the updated Z8. Let me just show you here that we are on the updated one. Going in, I will go first of all to our full area, and then we have Bird Detect as our subject. Okay, now, simple one, I've set up an iPad with a bird on it at my window, but at the moment this is focused at infinity through the window. So as I look out the window, you see it's looking in the background. That's the iPad there blurred out in the middle. It's not getting it, it's not getting it. If I pull it back, slowly, 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 slowly. Okay, so you're starting to see the shape of a bird there. See, and there it has gotten it. That's already better than it was doing. Let me show you. If I'm in the same, but just using animal, and again, we focused in the background, background, background. We start to pull it forward, and you see it has to get a lot closer before, yeah, now it's starting to see that there's an animal there, and there it gets the actual eye. So not nearly as close, but let's see if we set up this custom button. So I'm going to go into custom controls, and then here function button 1 I'm going to assign to the cycle AF area mode. Hitting right, we can go through and choose which ones we want to have in there. So I'm just going to go with single point, turn off all the others, and we'll even turn off 3D tracking. So that's it. Hit menu to jump out. So now again, going to infinity. We're currently in auto area. Okay. Then I hit my function button 1. There's my single point. Put that on the iPad, and boom, it has it. Then I hit the function button again, and it's all up and running. So I think that is a nice, elegant solution. If when you're shooting birds, you have a custom profile, like in my setup guide, I take you through exactly how to do that. So you could have one for portraits and birds and landscape, that kind of thing. I will now set that up as an option on the Z8, so that when I go into my custom settings menu for birds, that I just have those two modes. It's maybe not going to be necessary for portraits or landscape or street, that kind of thing, but that it's still an extra step to have to change the focus mode, move the single point to the bird, get focus, change the mode back again, but it's a lot less cumbersome than having to manually focus it and introduce all that wobble, or point down at the ground so that you're focused 6 meters away instead of 20 meters away to be able to find the bird. So a slightly more elegant solution to what I think is still a very solvable and quite stupid problem. So I think that pretty much does it for now. Let me know any questions that you have. Thanks to Nikon for letting me get early access to the firmware so I could test it out and show it to you guys. Over 15 different updates in there. I think it's really great to see that Nikon is making strides with updating the cameras with firmware. I know the comments are going to be, what about the Z6 II, Z7 II? In my honest opinion, I think that we've seen the big updates they're going to get. We'll probably see a few more big updates on the Z9, lots on the Z8, and then it'll be the future generations once they have even more capable processors that we're going to see the big updates. But I really hope we'll see the Z9 and the Z8 updated with my suggested solution to their foreground blur issue. See the previous video if you haven't already. Just a quick reminder, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out my expert setup guide. I have one for Nikon mirrorless as well as Fuji GFX and also Hasselblad. Details of courses and sales and stuff I have going on are in the description below. And my May Iceland tour. We've reached the group minimum. The trip is going. It's going to be really fun. I'm taking you to a bunch of my favorite locations that are off the beaten path, where we're going to have amazing access not only to the beautiful and hilarious puffins, but to all kinds of different birds, as well as a lot of amazing geological and landscape phenomena that are way off the traditional beaten path. And you'll have me there as your photography guide, a local expert who just knows everything about everywhere and has worked as like a film producer for loads of productions in Iceland, who really understands the needs of photographer. Should be a great trip. I'd love to have you. Check it out. Details are below. Let me know any questions you have. Ciao.